Some heroes never sought the spotlight. This is their story. They say that in the moment before you die, your life flashes before your eyes. But Marcus Chen wasn't thinking about his own life that Tuesday afternoon in September. He was thinking about the small hand that had just slipped through his fingers, disappearing beneath the dark water of San Francisco Bay. He had exactly 45 seconds to make a choice that would define him forever. This is the story of the man at Pier 47. A story that almost no one knows, because the hero never wanted to be found. Marcus Chen was not supposed to be a hero. At 42 years old, he was a logistics coordinator for a shipping company. The kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties, but mostly involves spreadsheets and conference calls. He lived alone in a modest apartment in the Sunset District, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and his most exciting hobby was trying new ramen restaurants on weekends. If you had passed Marcus on the street that September afternoon, you wouldn't have looked twice. Average height, slightly graying hair, wearing khaki pants and a wrinkled blue button-down shirt, because he'd forgotten to iron it that morning. He carried the weight of someone who'd given up on the gym but hadn't quite committed to letting himself go entirely. But there was something about Marcus that no one could see, something that had lived inside him since he was 7 years old, since the day his younger sister Emily nearly drowned in a community pool while he stood frozen on the deck, too terrified to jump in. A lifeguard had saved her. Marcus had watched, and for 35 years, that moment had defined him more than anything else he'd ever done. The therapist he'd seen in his 20s called it survivor's guilt. Marcus called it cowardice. The 17th of September, 2019. The date is burned into Marcus. As memory not because of what happened, but because of what almost didn't happen. He'd taken a late lunch that day. 9:47 p.m. according to the timestamp on his last email. He needed air. The office had felt suffocating. Another quarterly report showing declining margins. Another round of worried glances from management. Pier 47 wasn't on his usual route. He typically walked to a small park 2 blocks from the office, ate his sandwich, and returned within 30 minutes. But something made him turn left instead of right that day. Divine intervention. His mother would later say coincidence. Marcus would insist. But whatever it was, it put him on that pier at exactly 2:03 p.m. The pier was moderately crowded. Tourists taking photos, a few fishermen, some locals eating lunch. Marcus found an empty spot near the railing, unwrapped his turkey sandwich, and stared out at the water. The bay was choppy that day, a stiff breeze coming in from the west. He remembers thinking it was too cold for swimming. That is when he heard it. Not a scream. Screams are what you expect. This was worse. It was a mother's voice, high and sharp, shouting a name. Tyler. Marcus turned. 30 feet down the pier, a woman in a yellow sundress was running toward the railing, her phone clattering to the wooden planks. Other people were looking, pointing, but no one was moving. That terrible human hesitation, the bystander effect, psychologists call it, where everyone assumes someone else will act. But Marcus saw what they were pointing at. A small figure in the water, maybe 40 feet from the pier. A child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, thrashing. The current was already pulling him away, toward the open bay. What happened next took less than a minute, but Marcus can recall every fraction of every second. He didn't think. Thinking was what had paralyzed him at 7 years old. Thinking was the enemy. Instead, his body moved on some ancient instinct. The same instinct that had been waiting 35 years for a second chance. Marcus dropped his sandwich. He kicked off his shoes. He didn't remember climbing the railing, but suddenly he was standing on the wrong side of it, 3 feet above the dark water of the bay. Below him, the child. Tyler was going under. Someone shouted, "Wait for the Coast Guard." But the Coast Guard was minutes away. Tyler didn't have minutes. He had seconds. Marcus jumped. The water was shockingly cold, a full body slap that drove the air from his lungs. The bay in September is only about 60 degrees. Cold enough for hypothermia to start setting in within minutes. But Marcus didn't feel the cold. He felt the current strong and insistent, trying to pull him away from the pier. He opened his eyes underwater. The visibility was terrible, murky green darkness. He surfaced, gasped, got his bearings. Tyler was 15 feet away, further than he'd been when Marcus jumped. The current was winning. Marcus had been a decent swimmer in high school, but that was 25 years ago, and this wasn't a pool. This was the bay, with its currents and cold and infinite depth beneath him. His clothes were dragging him down. His lungs were already burning. He swam anyway. The lifeguard training manuals say you should approach a drowning victim from behind to avoid being grabbed and pulled under in their panic. Marcus remembered reading that somewhere, but when he reached Tyler, the boy was barely conscious, his movements weak, his lips already turning blue. Marcus grabbed him. Tyler's small hand clutched at his shirt, and Marcus felt a flash of the memory. His sister's hand 35 years ago, reaching for him. But this time, he didn't freeze. This time, he held on. The hard part wasn't reaching Tyler. It was getting back. The pier looked impossibly far away now. The current had pulled them both at least 60 feet from where Marcus had jumped. His arms felt like lead. Tyler was dead weight, his head lolling against Marcus's shoulder. Marcus's clothes were soaked, pulling him down with every stroke. He tried to swim, made it 5 feet. His legs cramped. The cold was getting to him now, seeping into his muscles, making them sluggish and unresponsive. He went under briefly, swallowed salt water, came up coughing. This is how people die, he thought with sudden clarity. This is how rescuers become victims. Above him, on the pier, people were shouting. Someone had thrown a life preserver, but it landed 20 feet short, useless. The woman in the yellow dress, Tyler's mother, was screaming her son's name over and over. Marcus made a decision. Instead, he let the current take them, angling his body to stay parallel to the shore. He remembered something from a beach safety poster. If you're caught in a rip current, swim parallel to the shore, not against it. It worked. Slowly, agonizingly, the current began to push them sideways, toward a boat launch ramp about 100 yards down. Marcus kicked weakly, his arms wrapped around Tyler, keeping the boy's head above water. He talked to Tyler, or tried to, his words slurred and breathless. "Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me. We're almost there." But Tyler wasn't responding anymore. Marcus's feet touched bottom at the boat ramp 63 seconds after he jumped from the pier. Though it felt like hours, he stumbled forward, barely able to stand, and laid Tyler on the concrete. The boy wasn't breathing. This was the moment Marcus had never trained for. He'd seen CPR in movies, but doing it was different. He tilted Tyler's head back, pinched his nose, and breathed into his small mouth. Nothing. He did chest compressions, counting aloud, his soaked hands slipping on Tyler's wet shirt. People were running down from the pier now. Someone was shouting that an ambulance was coming. But Tyler still wasn't breathing, and Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. The same panic he'd felt at 7 years old, watching his sister sink. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on, Tyler, breathe." He gave another breath, more compressions. His arms were shaking so badly he could barely maintain the rhythm, and then Tyler coughed. Water came out of his mouth. He coughed again, gasped, and started crying. The most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard. The paramedics arrived 4 minutes later. They wrapped Tyler in blankets, checked his vitals, praised Marcus for his quick action. Tyler's mother, her name was Jennifer, collapsed next to her son, sobbing, touching his face like she couldn't believe he was real. She looked up at Marcus, standing there in his soaking clothes, shivering uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "You saved him," she said. "You saved my baby." Marcus didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Part 5. The Disappearance. This is where most hero stories end, with the rescue, the grateful mother, the approaching news cameras. But Marcus Chen's story took a different turn. While the paramedics were loading Tyler into the ambulance, while Jennifer was giving her statement to the police, while a reporter from a local news station was setting up her camera, Marcus quietly walked away. He picked up his shoes from where he'd dropped them by the railing. He wrung out his shirt as best he could, and he left. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't give his name to the reporters. He didn't stay to see if Tyler was going to be okay, though he called the hospital later, anonymously, and was told the boy was fine, just cold and scared, but expected to make a full recovery. Marcus went back to his office, changed into the spare shirt he kept in his desk drawer, and finished his quarterly report. When his co-worker asked why his hair was wet, he said he'd gotten caught in a sprinkler. That evening, the story aired on the local news. Mystery hero saves drowning boy at Pier 47. Jennifer was interviewed, tearfully thanking the stranger who saved her son's life. The reporter asked if anyone knew who the man was. Several witnesses gave descriptions, but nothing concrete. The hero, they said, had vanished. Marcus watched the news segment from his apartment, eating reheated lo mein, when his phone rang, his mother asking if he'd seen the story, saying the man in the description sounded a bit like him. He laughed it off. There are probably 1,000 guys in this city who look like that, Mom. Part 6, The Silent Years. Marcus never told anyone what he'd done that day. Not his co-workers, not his friends, not even his sister Emily, who would have understood better than anyone. Why? People asked him that later, after the truth finally came out. Why stay silent? Why not accept the recognition, the praise, the title of hero? Marcus' answer was always the same. I didn't do it to be a hero. I did it because it needed to be done. But there was more to it than that. The truth was, Marcus didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who, finally, after 35 years, done what he should have done in the first place. He felt like a man who'd been carrying a debt since childhood. And he just made his first payment. Life went on. Marcus continued his job in logistics. He still ate lunch alone most days, still drove his aging Honda, still tried new ramen places on weekends. But something had changed in him, something subtle that no one else would notice. He didn't freeze anymore. When his elderly neighbor fell in the hallway, Marcus was there to help her up. When a lost child was crying in a grocery store, Marcus was the one who stayed until the parents were found. Small acts, nothing newsworthy, but acts nonetheless. And once a year, on the 17th of September, Marcus would walk to Pier 47. He'd stand at the railing, at the exact spot where he'd jumped, and he'd remember, not the fear or the cold or the pain in his muscles. He'd remember Tyler, small hand clutching his shirt. He'd remember the sound of the boy coughing, breathing, crying. He'd remember that he hadn't frozen. Part 7. The reunion 4 years later, on a Tuesday afternoon in September, Marcus was at Pier 47 again, his annual pilgrimage. He was standing at the railing, lost in memory, when he heard a voice behind him. "That is where you jumped. Isn't it?" A woman stood there, holding the hand of a boy who looked about 9 or 10 years old. It took Marcus a moment to recognize her. The yellow sundress was gone, replaced by jeans and a sweater, and her hair was shorter, but the eyes were the same. Jennifer Tyler. "How did you?" Marcus started. "I've been looking for you for 4 years, Jennifer said. "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago, tracked down everyone who was on the pier that day, matched descriptions. Found security footage from a nearby restaurant. It took time, but..." She gestured at him. "Here you are." Tyler was staring at Marcus with wide eyes. He was bigger now, taller, his baby face gone. But he was here. He was alive. "Tyler wanted to meet you," Jennifer said. "He's been asking about you since he was old enough to understand what happened. I told him about the man who saved his life, the man who disappeared. He calls you the quiet hero." Marcus looked down at the boy. Tyler stepped forward, let go of his mother's hand, and extended his own small hand to Marcus. "Thank you," Tyler said. His voice was clear and strong. "My mom says you jumped in the water to save me. She says you could have died." Marcus shook the boy's hand. His throat felt tight. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Jennifer said quietly. "That is not true. There were dozens of people on the pier that day. You were the only one who jumped." They stood there for a moment, the three of them, at the spot where everything had changed. Marcus didn't know what to say. He'd spent 4 years avoiding this moment, and now that it was here, he found he didn't want it to end. "Can I ask you something?" Tyler said. "Why did you leave? Why didn't you stay?" Marcus thought about that. He thought about the 7-year-old boy he'd been, frozen by fear. He thought about the 35 years he'd carried that weight. He thought about the 42-year old man who'd finally let it go, there in the cold water of the bay. Because, Marcus said slowly, I didn't save you to be thanked. I saved you because you deserved to be saved. And honestly, you saved me too, in a way you'll probably never understand. Jennifer's eyes were wet. Will you at least let me buy you coffee? Let Tyler get to know the man who gave him his life back. Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to politely decline, to disappear again, to remain the mystery hero. But then he looked at Tyler, alive, healthy, whole, and he thought maybe, just maybe, it was okay to stop running from this. Okay, Marcus said. Coffee sounds good. Marcus Chen. Story made headlines eventually. After that reunion at Pier 47, Jennifer convinced him to share his story publicly. But Marcus insisted it not be about him. Instead, he used the attention to promote water safety education and CPR training. He partnered with the Red Cross to offer free swimming lessons to low-income families. He started a foundation in Tyler's name, not his own, to provide life jackets at public beaches. When reporters called him a hero, he always corrected them, I am not a hero. I am just someone who didn't walk away. But here is what Marcus understood, what took him 35 years to learn. Heroes aren't people without fear. They people who act despite their fear. Heroes aren't born in moments of extraordinary courage. They reborn in ordinary moments, when ordinary people make the choice to do what is right, instead of what is easy. There is a plague now at Pier 47, placed there by the city 3 years after the rescue. It doesn't mention Marcus by name. He insisted on that. It simply reads, on this spot, the 17th of September, 2019, a stranger jumped into the bay to save a drowning child. His name was not recorded. His reward was not sought. His legacy is this reminder. In the moment when action is needed, be the one who acts. Marcus visits the plague sometimes, though less frequently now. He is busier these days, teaching CPR classes, organizing water safety events, mentoring young people who want to become lifeguards. He is still the same quiet man he always was, still drives the same car, still eats lunch alone sometimes. But he is no longer carrying the weight of that day at the community pool, the day he froze when his sister needed him. That debt has been paid, and in its place is something new, the knowledge that when the moment came, when everything was on the line, he didn't hesitate. He jumped. Tyler is 13 now. He is a competitive swimmer, hoping to make his high school team next year. He wears a small metal tag on a chain around his neck, engraved with a date. 9 divided by 17 divided by 19. His second birthday, he calls it. The day a stranger gave him his life back, and somewhere in San Francisco, in a modest apartment in the Sunset District, Marcus Chen lives his quiet life. He is still not a hero in his own eyes. He is just a man who learned that the bravest thing you can do isn't jumping into freezing water to save a drowning child. The bravest thing you can do is live with the knowledge that when the moment came, when someone needed you, you were there. You didn't walk away, you jumped. Sometimes the most heroic acts are done by the most ordinary people. Sometimes the greatest courage is found in the quietest hearts. And sometimes the truest heroes are the ones who never wanted the title at all. This is the silent hero.